if Trump were to bail, then you have, J.D. Vance. I don't know. No, I'm not.
Are you saying you'd like Trump to bail?
No, not at all. I mean, it's too late for that.
There could be a health event with Trump.
Both Republicans and Democrats were assuming it would be Shapiro, but I think Kamala was bullied by the pro-Hamas wing of her party.
It's going to be very difficult to pin some of these things on him that I think trying to make him out as an extremist. I think
it's sort of a healing choice in a lot of ways, and I think many Americans will see him as a healing choice.
If you look at weird, I mean, I have a long list of weird.
Hello and welcome to the American Fourcast. So, Kamala Harris has chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her 2024 running mate. Her pick for vice president comes with a compelling resume: Army veteran, public school teacher, football coach, and that's before he entered politics. Just the kind of broad appeal needed at a time when American politics is so very polarized. But Governor Walz was also an early supporter of the LGBTQ community. He championed abortion rights into state law and expanded free school meals and paid worker leave, allowing the Trump campaign to brand him as dangerously liberal extremist. Rest assured, the animosity is mutual. Walz's profile exploded after he called Donald Trump and J.D. Vance weird. So, is he the man to get Kamala Harris waltzing into the White House or not? To discuss this, I'm joined by Democrats Abroad UK's Vice Chair, John Scardino, Chairman of the Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson, and Karin von Hippel, Director General of the security think tank, RUSI. Welcome to you all. Karin, because I think you're relatively neutral in all this. You're neither Republican or Democrat officially.
I try to be, yes.
You try to be.
Yes.
As a neutral observer, does this change the dynamic of the race?
I think there is a momentum behind not only Kamala Harris over the last few weeks, but also choosing somebody like him. He seems to be genuinely an affable, likable guy. And I think that he appeals to, in particular, the white, blue-collar men in many states that they feel that they have to reach, that Trump has captured over the last decade or so. And I think that was one of the main reasons she chose him.
The person I thought when I saw him was Ted Lasso.
Yeah, he does have that kind of personality. He's kind of genial. He's the nice guy. When he argues with people, he's not rude. He's not nasty. But he seems like the kind of guy you want to invite over for dinner.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can do that. John, is that enough, being a nice guy in this very vicious race? And particularly the point which many people in America have been pointing out, that he comes from Minnesota, which is not a swing state. The last time Minnesota voted for a Republican was Nixon, was it 1972?
72.
So it's not a swing state. So why on earth, when you've got places like Pennsylvania, which are crucial, where she made the announcement, where she overlooked the governor of that state, why on earth would you choose Walz?
I do think that he comes with quite an impressive package, and you've said it makes you think of Ted Lasso. Actually, the character that I would compare him to is Captain Miller, the character that Tom Hanks plays in Saving Private Ryan. You might remember in some of that movie, the soldiers have a bit of a bet going on. What did you do before the war, Captain? And they keep guessing and guessing, and finally it comes out he was an English teacher and a baseball coach. I mean, it's that's a Hollywood.
Americans love a coach, don't
yes,
they?
They do, and that's the kind of role that he's played. It's one where he's always looking to support and help other people, which I think is a perfect role for him to play in the ticket. And what he will bring to it are a lot of those kind of qualities that are, I think, very much admired in the U.S.
Greg Swenson, you were rolling your eyes and twitching your eyebrows, which makes me think, reading between the lines, you don't agree with every word that John has said.
Well, whenever I hear that Pete Buttigieg has done a good job, I have to chuckle. But
hang on, he was quite impressive, though, wasn't he?
He's an impressive
television?
Guy. He's great.
He's clever. He speaks
McKinsey
7 languages.
He's a smart guy, and he does McKinsey speak constantly, and that's impressive.
Anyway, so when Walz was announced as a Republican, what did you think?
I was shocked, but thrilled. I think they were doing cartwheels at Mar-a-Lago yesterday.
Why?
Because Shapiro was the obvious choice, and it seemed to be the consensus, and I think even both Republicans and Democrats were assuming it would be Shapiro. But I think Kamala was bullied by the pro-Hamas wing of her party.
The pro-Hamas wing of her party.
Yeah,
I'm just going to have to pick you up on that.
Yeah,
phrase.
sure.
What is the pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat
the
Party?
radical, it's not the majority of Democrats, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a small wing of the party, but they're really worried about Chicago. That's the DNC's in a couple of weeks. There's going to be protests. I think there would have been much larger protests or more protests if it was Shapiro rather than Walz. So, I mean, it might have been
the pro-Hamas wing or the anti-Netanyahu wing? There's a difference, isn't there?
I would say both, perhaps. But
John, are you pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party?
I'm saying neither. I mean, this is a very curious terminology that I haven't heard before, and I think it's going to be very difficult to pin this guy who is an avid hunter.
Tim Walz,
Tim Walz,
member of the NRA,
and member of the NRA, and also and a serviceman. I think it's going to be very difficult to pin some of these things on him. That I think trying to make him out as an extremist.
I wouldn't necessarily say that Tim is an extremist. I'm saying that this is why they didn't choose Shapiro, and when that made sense on so many different levels. Pennsylvania for one, but also Shapiro is considered, at least perceived, as a moderate. And so I think that what Kamala Harris did was go the way that Trump did by picking J.D. Vance, someone in the same lane. Whereas, the argument for Shapiro was that, Kamala, who's a progressive leftist, could balance the ticket with the more moderate. Shapiro is pro-school choice, at least he campaigned on that. Got some heat from the teachers union. So
you're basically saying that Tim Walz, you think, as a Republican, is too left wing, is too progressive.
I think it's
and
fantastic for Republicans.
There's the left wing of the Democratic Party. Yes. I'll get on to you in a minute, Karin. Just quickly to you, John. Does the left wing of the Democratic Party have that kind of power?
No, I don't think so. I think that when you see what Biden has been able to achieve, he's built quite a broad coalition and a very successful one that's helped him get a lot of the things done in as president with the infrastructure, the chips thing, the rebuilding the economy. You don't do that by catering to one segment of your supporters.
I read a really interesting piece this morning in Politico, which said that there are 200 what they call pivot counties in America, and those were people who voted for Obama the first two times, and then they voted for Trump. And Walz won one of those seats in Minnesota, and he won it several times. And they also think he can reach out to those pivot communities across America and really try to win those seats back, which is what I was mentioning earlier about mostly white, blue-collar men.
So this was a Republican. This was a Republican seat, I think, in the south of the state. It was a rural seat. He won it, took it away from the Republicans. When he then became governor, it went back to the Republicans. But you run the security think tank. Is there a Hamas wing of the Democratic Party that you or others should be worried about?
Look, I think certainly there's been huge tension in the United States at universities that we've seen over what's going on in Gaza, and many are in the Democratic Party are very concerned. But as you say, it's potentially also, I don't see it as pro-Hamas. I think most of the kids would say they're not pro-Hamas, but they're anti what Israel is doing in this state. But neither Kamala Harris nor Tim Walz have enormous foreign policy credentials. They both come really with much more of a domestic focus. And so I think that is going to be something that the Trump team will probably try to push on. Now, she can say, well, I've been sitting here for the last 4 years working on every single issue Biden has worked on, including foreign policy. So she's been learning from one of the most experienced foreign policy presidents America's had in many decades.
Because, one of their lines is, we bring joy back to the campaign. Her nickname from Trump was Laughing Kamala before it became Lying Kamala. This is her nickname, his nickname for her. Is there a danger that the Democrats seemed like innocents abroad at a time when abroad is basically going up in flames? Karin?
No, I don't think so. I think actually they're projecting a positive forward vision, and that's really both now Tim Walz, who is not he's not kind of an angry person. I think Trump has to be very careful that he's starting to look like an angry, cornered, embittered man. We saw that in Georgia when he was insulting the governor of Georgia, who's very popular in Georgia. And I think he's feeling cornered now. 2 weeks ago, you were at the convention, Greg. That was like a coronation. You were there too, weren't you, Matt?
Sure. We were next to each other.
It's changed.
In fact,
so
I interviewed
much.
him. I remember.
That's right. It's just changed.
Well, no, actually, to be fair, Karin's got a point there. When I spoke to you at the convention, this was about 5 days before Biden bowed out of the race.
Right.
You were smiling with your eyes, Greg. And so was everyone else there.
Well done by Democrats. They waited till Trump was the nominee. It was a great convention, very unified. And then they pulled the trigger on Sunday, 2 days after the convention closed up. It was brilliant.
But wasn't it a mistake of the Republicans to assume that Biden, who was frankly having trouble getting any signups as connecting at the time, would last all the way to November the 5th?
Yeah, I think that it was a mistake. I think they should have been better prepared for the announcement on that Sunday. And of course, the campaign, I was looking through my chat today back to the convention. And, even that week, the Biden campaign was saying he's campaigning next week, he's not dropping out. He was very
But let's look ahead, right? She's been very disciplined since she got the nod. And seems to have been sort of buoyed in her confidence, right?
Yeah, because
in the last few weeks.
She's not done any interviews, right? So wait till that happens. Wait till there's actually interviews where
Trump
she has
doesn't
to
do
answer
interviews
questions.
with people other than Fox News, right? So he's not getting
That's not true. He went in front of the black correspondents.
Yeah, and how did that go? Sorry, but how did that go?
Honestly, that was not an interview. That was a staged fight that he was there to pick.
It was. I don't think it was well done on his part at all. But look, he's not afraid to do that.
But John, that is a fair point, isn't it, from Greg? Kamala Harris is not known for being confronted by tough interviewers, for being, have her feet held to the fire. Is that going to change now?
Well, of course it will. I mean, and I would disagree. I would disagree with your earlier characterization of her. I mean, she's been the vice president. It's not the vice president's role to be out there. It's the president's role. So her job is to be in a supporting role. Her job, particularly in the first few years of the administration, was to stick close by, to be the deciding vote in an evenly divided Senate. Remember, it was 50-50, 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats. She got to cast the deciding vote. She couldn't ever go more than a couple of hours from Washington for the first year or so of the Biden administration. So,
which is her excuse also for not going to the southern border, which was one of her responsibilities.
I'm sure that she has been working. Anyway, I'm sure that we will come to that. As I'm sure I can feel Greg
like a tongue to an aching tooth.
Exactly, moving to the edge of his seat over here. But I think as far as her abilities, look, the woman is a trained prosecutor. She has had lots of experience being eloquent under pressure. I'm sure that we will see that those skills are going to be at the fore when it's time.
And fair point. And she's been very effectively saying something that, no Republican dared to say, and not even Biden dared to say. I'm the former prosecutor, and you, Mr. Trump, are the convicted felon.
Yeah,
that's quite an effective line, isn't it?
Sure, I think it is.
Which she has used against your man.
I think that was a good line. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, I can argue about the merits of his conviction, but that's a different conversation. But it was a good line.
And just, Karin, I mean, you mentioned her, she then got her credentials abroad. She was pushed out more and more on the global stage. Yeah. She went to the Munich Security Conference. She's been at big international events at a time of war, both in Ukraine and the Middle East. I don't know if you spoke to people who saw her there. Kamala Harris,
I've
just briefly on her. Were they impressed by the performance?
I've been at the Munich conference the last few years, and she has not been that impressive. So I think you're right, Matt.
She's not been that impressive.
No, what you said earlier was right. She was kind of wooden. She was stilted. The language was a bit trite. It was about democracy and freedom. And all of a sudden, as you said, she's kind of become an authentic person in this role. She's embraced it, and she's relaxed into the role. So she's totally changed around. I mean, it's very fascinating to watch that transformation and to see her relax into the role, even though most people would feel a lot of pressure because it's changed so significantly. But she seems to be enjoying it, and I think that's infectious. I think people like that about her.
Okay, let's bring it back to Tim Walz and his record as governor of Minnesota. So, when people talk about radical, extremist liberals, and you transfer that to this country, it's just basically boring mainstream politics, like, free school, lunches, or abortion rights, codified by law, etc. To what extent does that attack line, John, from the Republicans, that he's basically too left-wing, does that work in, rural constituencies in the Midwest? Put yourself in their shoes.
One of the hottest selling items on the campaign website right now is the camo hat that Walz wore when Harris called him and said, "Will you be my vice presidential?"
In that incredibly spontaneous conversation.
It was incredibly spontaneous. How they had the cameras there
it's amazing.
at the time, I don't know. They're very fortuitous. But yes, he was wearing his camo hunting hat, and they've printed up lots of these with Harris Walz. It's their challenge to the MAGA red caps, and it's the hottest selling campaign item. I know I'm stretching this a little bit, but it is kind of indicative of this guy's appeal across a broad swathe of the U.S. population.
But if you dig into his record as a governor of Minnesota, it's not quite as rosy as, let's say, the picture of, Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He's not as popular. He's accused of not having sent out, the police or indeed the National Guard after the Black Lives Matter thing erupted as quickly as he should have done to restore law and order, et cetera, et cetera.
I would just challenge that by saying the guy is also the head of the Democratic Governors Association. You don't get to be in that position if your peers who are also doing the job, like Shapiro, if your peers don't support you in being the head of the organization.
Because he's avuncular, maybe, or he's a nice guy.
Well,
I don't think that line works in the Greg.
Yeah, he's a likable guy, no doubt. And I think what's coming out is his extreme left record as governor. He started as a moderate. When he won his seat in 2006, granted it was a great year for Democrats, but he did win a Republican seat. And so he kind of had to run as a moderate. Then when he ran for governor, two other candidates split the far left vote, which enabled him as a perceived moderate to win the governor's race. But then since then, he's governed very far to the left. There's no doubt about that.
But he doesn't look like a left-wing firebrand. No. He doesn't give off those vibes. I'm sorry, Greg.
I know.
You may think that he's a Marxist in disguise.
I agree.
He just doesn't come across like that.
He's a likable guy, but his policies and his decision-making have been very progressive.
I actually see him as a moderate. I mean, the free school lunches, he did that because he's been a teacher before, and he sees that the poor kids are marginalized and everyone sees them as being poor, so let's just give it to everybody so we don't make those kids feel bad. I mean, that's actually a lovely thing to do. That's not left or right, right? And he's a football coach. So I don't think that he's been in the military. I don't know. I don't see him as being that radical. Minnesota isn't really considered like California or really a lefty state.
I mean, Greg, let's be honest here. You guys are panicking, aren't you?
No. I think
You're panicking.
I think there was panic, last 2 Sundays ago when they made the announcement, because it shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was to many. And so I think you saw President Trump behaving like he was in a panic. And there's no doubt about that. But things are calming down. We understand that there's going to be, Kamala's the it girl right now. She's done a decent job so far.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but when Trump was on his golf cart at one of his golf estates with his son, Barron, and there was a conversation filmed with a couple of fellow golfers, and he was unbelievably rude and expletive about Kamala Harris.
Right.
And more or less said, well, if she turns up as the candidate, well, it's the race is over.
Right.
Expectations for her were very, very low, including amongst Democrats, by the way.
That is true.
The power of being underestimated, or as George W. Bush once famously said, misunderestimated.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Like, she was polling in the 30s. She was considered worse than Biden, which is saying something. Also the lowest rated vice president in modern history.
Okay, well, that's all history now, isn't it?
She went from mid-30s to mid-60s. I mean, it's amazing.
All right.
I mean, good for her.
That's why
Great turnaround.
That's why I think you might be panicking. But the other point, getting back to Walz, is on the other side, you've got J.D. Vance. And when Donald Trump says in front of a bunch of journalists, well, the vice presidential role isn't that important. That's about as dissy as you can get for your running mate, for the next generation.
Right. Historically, that's true. But this is a different election. So, I mean, I'm
talking about Trump. Trump has buyer's remorse when it comes to J.D. Vance.
I don't know about that. I think what Trump did was pick someone much like Kamala did. Kamala picked Walz as someone that she gets along with, that she's got a personal relationship with. Okay, that's valid. I understand that. Rather than being, transactional about it, saying I got to win Pennsylvania or I've got to win moderates or independents or swing voters, she went with a personal vibe. I think Trump did the same thing. There's arguments.
Apparently he
to be
didn't
made.
want him, and it was his son Donald Jr. who persuaded him to have J.D. Vance.
Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. I mean, he is a bit of a mini-me for Trump.
That's right.
But
same lane.
I think
Absolutely.
he said some things since he's come out, and they're digging up things that he said in the past. And I think Trump is a bit nervous about it. But as you say, Greg, I think Trump sees himself as the only person who matters. And by the way, he was that way when he ran the government last time.
Okay.
He was the only one who, remember, he called himself the decider.
Yeah.
So nobody else matters, and he's quite happy to fire people. And I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to fire J.D.
Those are the words of a stable genius, obviously. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if he fired him either. But before that, imagine that debate between J.D. Vance, also a veteran. He served in the Marines. He actually went to Iraq. And then you've got Tim Walz, who was I think is a 12-year veteran in the National Guard who did not go to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, if you listen to right-wing voices out there on social media, there's a swift boat campaign coming for Tim Walz sometime very soon. And we know how that worked out for John Kerry. It basically did for him when he tried to become president. It was one of the things it did for him. Is there a danger here, again, with your security hat on?
I just don't see
that that these credentials could basically fly in his face?
It's possible, but he doesn't sell himself as a military veteran either. He sells himself as a teacher, as a principal, as a governor. And so I don't see him, but also I think
you don't think he's going to be swift-boated,
No,
Greg?
I hope not, because I think
try.
that could backfire.
That's very good of you.
I don't think that's the way to go. Nor do I think picking on school lunches. If you have illegal migrants, which he's welcomed into his state, and you still have to feed them. I mean, you can't let the poor kids starve, right? So I'm not for that. I don't think that should be a big issue. The other things that he's governed from the left on, that's fair game. But I hope they don't pick on the military thing, and I hope they don't pick on the school.
But they might do.
They might, yeah.
I think the debate will be interesting, though, as you say, because they both actually, don't forget, Walz grew up in Nebraska. And so he also grew up in a similar place like Appalachia. And so I think they're both going to try to speak to rural voters in that debate with different styles. But I think it'll be more interesting, actually, than the Kamala Trump debate.
Because J.D. Vance, pick on him for his past comments, but he's very articulate. He's done a good job in the last 2 weeks.
So the amazing thing, what I love about American politics, it's a little bit like sort of commenting on a sports event. It's a bit like the Olympics. Who's up, who's down, who's ahead, who's behind. And or like theater criticism, right? Do we like his style or her style? Did they pause? Did they fluff? But actually, all this needs to be seen in the context of what is going on in America. And that is lots of things, including, John, the economy. Now, if you look at the economic numbers this week, they're not great. People are discussing whether America's heading for a recession. This whole debate about, someone's military record, who's sharper, who's not, that could be totally irrelevant in a month's time, could it not, John?
I'm no economist, but if I look around the world, whose economy would I like to have?
But people in America don't care about the economy in Germany or France. They care
I'm just saying. Fair enough.
Comparisons don't work.
Yeah. I don't know.
The only comparison, you remember that famous Reagan question in 1980 that won him, the election. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And the answer was no. After 4 years of Jimmy Carter. Whether he was responsible for or not is another matter. It doesn't matter. You get pinned with the blame if you're in charge. And isn't that a problem? John?
I can't predict what's going to happen with the economy. I think it's been a very strong economy.
But are you worried about that?
I am not. I think that the recovery since COVID has been extraordinary. I think inflation has been lower than expected. I think the recovery has been stronger than expected. I think the job growth has been phenomenal. Yes, there are still some hot spots within the economy that are of concern to everybody.
But ordinary Americans, and there are lots of them, feel much worse off, whether it's the toothpaste or, gas, petrol, at the petrol station. The cost of living has bitten them hard. And that is a problem that, whether you like it or not, you can't get around.
There are some items within the economy that we all buy on a day-to-day basis that have stayed high. And one of the big ones obviously is mortgages. And again, this is an area I'm treading into.
No, sure.
But
But you acknowledge the fact that it might be a problem.
And is there going to be an interest rate cut? I don't know. What's the impact of that going to be? Is it going to be good or bad? Very difficult to tell.
Yeah, it's coming, but it won't. It's not soon enough. You know what I mean? Like if they cut rates, they will in September. The market's priced in 50 basis points. It's not going to have an effect by November. But what's important is what you brought up, Matt. Groceries are up 20% since Biden took office. Petrol's up 40%.
Yeah.
So cost of energy overall is up 25%. So this is a big issue. The number one issue in most elections, and this one as well, is the economy. Inflation is a big issue here. And look, and any of the metrics that you see that are positive, like GDP growth, all government driven. 63% of the jobs created last month, which wasn't many.
But I wonder whether so having just said the economy is paramount, I just wonder whether it is, because actually what you also have is this accusation that Trump, will rise above the law. The Supreme Court has given him, the wherewithal to basically get away with murder if he wants to. I mean, the incredible, a culture of immunity that he could take advantage of. His language is abrasive. And of course, that rather hurtful adjective leveled against him by your man, Tim Walz, he's just downright weird. What do you say about weird? You're not weird, Greg.
No, weird.
You don't do weird.
I got a kick out of that. It was very
You did?
It was very well executed. I saw a clip yesterday on Fox, of course, that was all these different politicians on the left using the term weird. I mean, maybe they sent a memo out, or maybe it just caught on. But if you look at weird, I mean, I have a long list of weird. Like people are going to look at J.D. Vance. Is he weird? He's married, children, pretty straight down the middle. And then Kamala, was at the RuPaul event, announcing her candidacy or whatever it was.
Is weird bad? Karin, is weird bad?
I think it was a nice way to be critical, right? Whereas Trump uses pretty nasty language sometimes when he's critical.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Walz is showing, that he can argue with people, but he doesn't do it in a nasty way. And so I think that's a message that people got from that.
Because once upon a time, a long time ago, there was this metric in every American election: would you like to have a beer with that guy? And I remember the 2004 election.
Bush, right?
I'm happy to have a beer with George W. Bush, although it would be an alcohol-free lager because he doesn't drink.
That's true.
After having drunk too much, but he made that journey from Johnny Walker to Jesus Christ, and he stopped drinking. Would you like to have a beer with John Kerry? Not so much, right?
Yeah, good point.
And do you want to have a beer with Donald Trump?
I'd rather have a beer with
J.D. Vance. He doesn't drink
Vance.
alcohol.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
Would you like to have
Like, he's a teetotaler, like
He's a teetotaler as well, exactly.
Yeah.
Although actually, having met Trump, I have to say he can be quite charming.
I've heard nothing but nice things about him.
But that's for another podcast.
Yeah.
The undiscovered.
Trump. What I meant, I was going to finish that. In terms of like sitting down with him and having a conversation, he's a likable guy.
But the bigger point,
Not
I'm
on
trying to get to a
TV,
serious. Let me try and get to a serious point here. No, the serious point I'm trying to make is this: that Trump was very good in 2016. He was very good at being bad. He was very good at channeling the anger of America. And I wonder whether America's just had enough of that kind of anger, Karin, and whether actually there's a kind of relief when you come across, a couple at the top of the ticket that are not just growling the whole time and catastrophizing about carnage in America.
And J.D. Vance is the same. He's basically trying to channel the anger of white working class men. Mm-hmm. And I think what Walz and Harris are going to try to do is be forward looking and be positive looking. You saw that even Kamala Harris, when she was accused of not being black, even though she was raised a black woman and she actually went to a historic black college, she didn't respond to that criticism. She just said, it was inappropriate, basically. But she didn't do a tit for tat right back at Trump. And so they're trying to be above it all. And I think that's the right way to go, because I think you're right, Matt. I think the Americans are tired of this divisive language.
I want to ask you, Greg, Trump and Vance are both slipping in the polls right now. She's got the momentum with Tim Walz. Are you worried that this slippage will continue?
Of course I am. I mean, and I don't think it will. And I'm not saying that as a partisan. I'm just saying right now there's momentum, right? Front page news Sunday after the convention. It's all been about Kamala and now Tim. And then you have the DNC coming up. So I think there'll be a bump from that. But it will settle down. And remember, the polls are just back to where they were pre-debate, pre-June 27th debacle for Biden. So it's not.
It's still
really
on a knife
changed.
edge, isn't it, John?
There was a great poll that I saw recently with Harris out at 51 or 52% and Trump at 28%. Yeah. And it was striking because it was his poll done by the Evening Standard of the British view of the race. And I think polls can
I don't think Trump was
exactly.
But I tell you what worries me, Karin. Having spent a lot of time in America, what worries me is that, and this is an unusually civil encounter here, but what worries me when you talk to Republicans and Democrats is that both sides believe that if the other side wins, their world, their version of the republic is finished. And yet the result is decided by 70,000, 100,000, 120,000 swing voters in three swing states. Right. To have such a zero-sum game with such a tiny margin of victory or defeat is alarming.
Right, but I think that's also another reason she chose Tim Walz. Don't forget Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is also another Ivy League educated. So the two of them would have appeared both quite elitist, whereas Walz doesn't. And I think it's sort of a healing choice in a lot of ways. And I think many Americans will see him as a healing choice. And so I think it'll be less divisive, actually, if he wins.
It's called the Fourcast. So normally we ask people to forecast something, but I'm not going to ask you to do that for the election because, of course, it's November the 5th. These are early days and there's anything that could happen. And you're going to tell me that the Democrats will win and you'll tell me that the Republicans will win. And Karin, I'm not going to compromise your neutrality in any way. So I would like you to focus on possible surprises or shocks, because frankly, since that disastrous debate 5 weeks ago, we've had a lorry load of history happening. So what's the next historic shock coming down the pipe? Karin, what do you think?
Well, interestingly, James Carville, the Democratic strategist, predicted some time ago that neither Biden nor Trump would be here at the end. So don't forget, as Harold Wilson used to say, a week is a long time in politics. Nowadays, it's the time that your browser gets rebooted. It can be a long time in politics. So I would be open for many more surprises to come.
Okay, so here's one, Greg. J.D. Vance gets fired. And if the polls are really, really bad for your man Trump, he might bow out of the race.
I don't know about that.
You're not giving me a flat no there.
J.D. Vance is here to stay.
Yeah.
If Biden had pulled out a year ago, Trump would not be the nominee. Is
Really?
my argument. Yeah, because the grudge match. It was the lawfare. That's what elevated Trump. DeSantis was basically tied with Trump. CNN had him up 2 points in March of 23. But as soon as it became the grudge match, so I think it was brilliant again that the Democrats waited to punt on Biden until after the convention. So
what shock?
I think
what shock awaits you, Greg? What keeps you up in the middle of the night?
That's a good one. If Trump were to bail, then you have. J.D. Vance. I don't know. No, I'm not.
Are you saying you'd like Trump to bail?
No, not at all. I mean, it's too late for that.
There could be a health event with Trump. He is not a youngster. He eats a lot of McDonald's.
I'm not feeling,
who could have
total loyalty here. This might be held against you, Greg.
I don't do loyalty.
You don't do loyalty. That's good to know.
I do common sense, and what people miss is peace and prosperity, and that's what we had in 2019 and 20.
So are you seriously thinking that Trump might actually...
No, you said that and I was just speculating on it, right? I think it's less likely than, I think J.D. Vance is here to stay. He's been very good on the stump in the last 2 weeks.
Just to be clear, you think that Vance getting fired by Trump is less likely than Trump bowing out of the race?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's still very unlikely, both.
Big surprises, John?
I think that it's
Nasty
very unlikely
nice?
that Trump, the only way you will get Trump out is on a stretcher. And which is a real possibility.
Which was close.
Yeah,
3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Now you're saying that also because you hope that this is a race against Trump, because you know that like they loved having Biden there because they knew the target. You love having Trump there because you know the target.
If you have to have at least some part of the Republican apparatus to support that idea, and I don't think that there's enough there to do that, and I don't think that they would be able to engineer a replacement in time. To be honest with you, I mean, because the convention will be done. I just don't see mechanically how you could.
It's far-fetched.
I do think it's far-fetched. I think J.D. Vance is there to stay. I think Trump will stay, and possibly I mean, I don't like to wish this on anybody, but maybe there is a health incident of some sort. But I think that would be the only way that he wouldn't be running as the nominee in November.
Well, we've come to the end. Thank you very much, John Scardino, Greg Swenson, Karin von Hippel. That's it for this week's edition of the American Fourcast. Who knows what next week has to offer? There's so much history on a daily basis. Goodbye. See you soon.